How does an orphan with no money build one of the most iconic brands in the world? The story of Ray-Ban is both unexpected and inspiring, and today we're diving deeper into its remarkable history and how a homeless immigrant whose first business failed would go on to create one of the longest lasting companies in the world, selling products embraced by movie stars, celebrities, and even presidents. The story of Ray-Ban begins with John Bosch, the company's unlikely founder. John was born all the way back in 1830 in the Kingdom of Württemberg to parents George and Anna. He came from humble beginnings. Here, his father was a baker who struggled to provide for the family. Then, when John was just 6, his mother tragically died, meaning that he was raised a poor boy with very little care and direction, giving no indication that he would one day become successful. And to make things worse, when he was 16, his father died, leaving him an orphan. And while John was devastated, it was his father's death that truly changed his life forever. With his older brother now in charge of the household, he began apprenticing John as a wood turner and optician, teaching him the basics of turning wood, grinding lenses, and making eyeglasses. With this new set of skills, John made a bold decision and moved 250 miles south to Switzerland, against the wishes of his family, taking his first job with a local optician. However, as the only employee at the shop, John was poorly paid, making pennies per day while often being overworked. So seeing no prospects there, Bosch packed up and headed to America in 1849. It was the land of opportunity and he could hardly wait. But upon arriving in New York, John's experience wasn't what he imagined. Due to the economic downturn, limited skills, and poor English, John was forced to settle for a variety of short-term jobs, like a cook's assistant and wood turner, which again paid almost nothing. As a result, his living conditions were miserable, and he was forced to hop around between battered, overcrowded boarding houses. His decision to leave the family farm back home was looking like a monumental mistake. After an entire winter of this, John borrowed $5 from a friend and set out for Rochester, hoping that this would finally be the place he could create something better for himself. But once again, this new destination proved to be much of the same, and for nearly 3 more years, he worked odd jobs as a wood turner, earning $1 a day, resulting in him being evicted from his boarding house because he couldn't afford rent. John was now homeless, and he had seemingly hit rock bottom. However, he did have a dream, and that was to start his own business as an optician. So he wrote a letter to his brother back home, seeking his share of the family's estate to help fund his business. Upon receiving the money, John ordered a batch of glasses and began selling them on the streets to local residents. He even rented out a small shop on Main Street, hoping that this would bring in even more interest. However, due to his poor English, he sold very few units, and after a month, he gave up. His first business was a total failure. Nothing was going right for the young immigrant. Forced to return to wood turning, John would run into even more misfortune, cutting off 2 of his fingers in a buzzsaw accident. But with more spare time than ever, Bosch decided to give optics another try. Realizing that the language barrier was a problem, John focused his resources on marketing to the city's German immigrants, running ads to them in the community's local newspapers. And immediately, sales took off, so much so that Bosch opened up a small retail store in Rochester in 1853 called J.J. Bosch Optician, one of the first optical shops in town. Here he sold spectacles, telescopes, microscopes, and opera glasses, all imported from his brother in Germany, who also ran an optical store overseas. Bypassers were intrigued. The business was the first of its kind, a shop that specialized solely in optics, and as a result, over the next few years, sales grew. Bosch's second business was looking like a success. Despite that, the business was losing money hand over fist, and they were in desperate need of funds. So John turned to his friend and employee, Henry Loam, in 1855 and offered him equal ownership of the company if they ever turned a profit, in exchange for his life savings of $60. Loam accepted, and the 2 men were now business partners. Despite this influx of cash, little changed, and the small optics shop continued to hemorrhage money for years, forcing the duo to take on odd jobs like repairing broken window panes just to keep their store afloat. But even that wasn't enough to keep up with all of the money the business was losing, so they turned to credit, often taking out one loan to pay off another. Despite all of the customers, the business was a mess behind the scenes. They were now 8 years in and had yet to turn a profit, and by now Bosch owed Lohm nearly $1,000. But luckily, the American Civil War was on the horizon, and the company was about to be changed forever. In 1861, Henry Lohm enlisted in the American Civil War for 2 years, and while he was gone, John made a breakthrough that totally transformed the fortune of his company. One day, while walking around town, he found a piece of vulcanite rubber on the street, and got the idea that this could be a good material for frames. Their current frames were made from expensive materials like gold and deer horns, making their products only accessible to the rich and famous. So John began to experiment with this rubber, often working 18+ hours a day, hoping that it would make their glasses cheaper and stronger. Immediately, the vulcanite framed glasses were a hit, so much so that John enlisted his 2 sons to help him with the business, where they often worked 7 days a week into the night just to craft enough frames to meet the demand. Even better, the company finally began churning a profit too, and they now had over $800 in the bank, even though it would take until 1890 when Bosch was in his 60s when they'd finally begin making substantial profits. Things were finally looking up for John and Henry's optics company. Keeping his promise of equal partnership, the company got renamed to Bosch & Lohm Optical Company, officially making the two equals in the company. Under Bosch's inventiveness and Lohm's continued support, the company thrived, and the once small shop transformed into a giant manufacturing corporation that dominated the market, in part to them developing a piece of cutting-edge machinery which replaced hours of individual labor while allowing them to produce their own glasses in America. Dozens of new products were added, and as demand grew, they began opening shops in many of the world's largest markets. However, the company's 2 founders were starting to grow old, and the company was about to be shaken up in a big way. In 1908, Lohm, Bosch's longtime business partner, died, sending shockwaves through the company. Despite this loss, the company's position in the industry proved to be extremely beneficial, and as World War I began, the US government contacted them in desperate need of optical glass for military equipment. Seeing an opportunity here, Bosch and Lohm began making rangefinders, binoculars, telescopes, and other instruments for the Army and Navy, without which the US military would have been helpless. Soon, allies like England, France, Italy, and Canada placed orders for similar products. By 1918, the company was producing 70% of the US's optical glass, making Bosch arguably the most important supplier for the war in the world. Thanks to this new government operation, Bosch & Lohm was now employing 6,000 people who were manufacturing thousands of products per week, helping sales top $14 million per year, almost all of which was coming from governments. So to say business was booming during the war was an understatement. However, by now, John was getting older and history was about to repeat itself. In 1926, John, who started this optical empire, died at 95, and his son Edward replaced him. And even though much of the operation remained the same, in 1936, the company made a unique discovery that totally changed their trajectory. As new airplanes were allowing pilots to fly higher, many Air Force pilots began to complain that the glare from the sun was giving them headaches. And as the trusted supplier for the military, Bosch & Lohm was called upon to fix the problem. So later that year, the company developed a pair of dark green aviation sunglasses designed to reduce glare without hindering your vision, called anti-glare, which they renamed the following year to Ray-Ban. And that is when a legend was born. Even though these were initially designed for military use, these sunglasses quickly resonated with civilians too, who wanted the same high-performance glasses the pros were using. And before long, this new style spread from pilots to anyone with an outdoor lifestyle. And even though sunglasses were relatively unheard of until the 20s, by 1938, the US was selling 20 million pairs per year, a lot of which were Ray-Bans. These new glasses completely took the market by storm, and the company went from being a military supplier to a fashion brand. Capitalizing on this momentum, Bosch & Lohm went public on the New York Stock Exchange in 1937. Business was booming for the company, all thanks to their new Ray-Bans. They were the go-to name in the industry, and by 1950, revenue soared to $48 million per year, and they had over 150 grinding labs across the United States to facilitate their massive business. And just when it seemed like Ray-Ban was at the peak of its powers, things were about to get much better. In 1952, the company had its next big breakthrough, introducing their Wayfarers, a pair of plastic frame shades, which represented a sharp contrast from their signature metal frame aviators. Initially intended for men, it wasn't long until women fell in love with the sleek, shiny design too, and soon these new sunglasses were seen on everyone from presidents, to fashion icons, to musicians, quickly becoming the company's most popular sunglasses, which they still are today. Meanwhile, the company made another huge innovation, introducing their first set of contact lenses after 3 years of development, and immediately sales took off here too. And by 1973, this new product already accounted for a whopping 50% of B&L's revenue, adding to the best 2 decades in the company's history. However, by the 70s, sales began to decline, and the brand was becoming stale, so much so that the Wayfarers were on the verge of discontinuation as they were only selling 18,000 pairs per year. In an effort to revive the brand, Ray-Ban signed a $50,000 a year deal with unique product placement to place their Ray-Ban glasses in movies and television shows, which proved to be a genius marketing strategy. Over the next 5 years, the company's glasses were featured in over 60 shows per year, and sales soared, and their signature Wayfarers sold 360,000 pairs in 1982, over 800,000 by 1985, and an incredible 1.5 million in 1986, thanks to them being featured in Top Gun with Tom Cruise. Other celebrities like Michael Jackson, Madonna, Jack Nicholson, and others were seen wearing Ray-Bans during this time as well, and revenue soared to nearly $700 million. The 80s were a time of celebration for Ray-Ban, but that was all about to change once again. Despite Ray-Ban's massive popularity throughout the 80s, by the turn of the century, the company fell badly out of sync with the times. Wraparound frames from new competitors, which removed all sunlight, began to gain steam, and sales once again fell flat. Meanwhile, Bausch & Lomb was facing a restructure due to a drop in profits, so in 1999, Bausch & Lomb sold Ray-Ban to Luxottica, the world's leading eyewear producer, which owned brands like Brooks Brothers, Oakley, and Vogue for $640 million, meaning that the brand that was responsible for so much of the company's recent popularity was now gone, marking the end of an era. Under this new leadership, the company began introducing a variety of new innovations, like Ray-Ban for children and their carbon fiber collection. Additionally, they redesigned their signature Wayfarers while reintroducing some of their old designs. And after a 10-year slump, Ray-Bans again began showing up on new celebrities like Matthew McConaughey, David Beckham, and Jay-Z, helping make Ray-Ban the hottest name in eyewear, which they remain today. As for Bausch & Lomb, following the sale of their sunglasses empire, the company focused its efforts on contact lenses, pharmaceuticals, and surgeries before they were acquired by private equity firm Warburg Pincus in 2007 for $8.7 billion, even though they are publicly traded again after a recent IPO. And considering the entire operation was started by a poor homeless immigrant, they have to be considered one of the most unlikely companies in the world.